So today you're reading us an excerpt from your novel, Portraits, Passions, and Other Pastimes, which is a fantastic
Yes.
title. So I want to start things off with a little description of the book so readers know what to expect. So, a grumpy marquis with an inheritance problem. When his father dies, Raph Bromley, new Marquess of Waneborough, inherits a crumbling estate, an ocean of debt, a valuable art collection, and a most unusual stipulation in his father's will. No piece in the art collection can be sold unless Rafe creates a brilliant work of art. But he's all thumbs and no imagination, and that's never going to happen. Thank goodness for heiresses. Rafe will simply marry for money. Except his mother's new companion, a clever but poor beauty, tests his resolve and makes him think maybe painting wouldn't be so hard. A clever companion with no home of her own. After 15 years of work, Matilda Bellvue has inherited a cottage of her very own. She'll make it her home after completing one final job, serving as companion to the Marquess of Waneborough's mother. Her task is simple: help the grieving marchioness, and, above all else, do not fall in love with her employer, a man who makes her feel like she's finally found home. When Rafe asks Matilda to help him understand art and earn his inheritance, their attraction sizzles into something more. But she has no money, he must marry rich, and falling in love offers only heartache. So, Charlie, can you set up the scene you're about to read?
In the scene that I'm going to read, he is decided he needs a companion for his mother. His mother is just like over the top in all ways, including her grief. And despite her and her husband's flaws as parents, they were very much in love with one another. So she's really feeling the loss of her husband. And he, despite his anger at how his parents mistreated the fortune and everything that was entrusted to them to keep, he still, feels very protective of his mother and wants to take care of her. So he's going to go get her a companion. So this scene is from Matilda, the companion's point of view, and she is with the woman she's currently a companion for. And so Rafe is going to come in and basically be like, I need you, and we'll see what happens.
Nice. All right, take it away.
The Viscountess Pratsby started snoring, and Matilda peeked over the edge of her book. Lady Pratsby slumped in her large rose-pink chair, sleeping. Thank the heavens. The woman had been suffering a horrid bout of insomnia. Nothing seemed to work to help her sleep, and she despised being coddled, but she did not like Matilda to read to her, and it had been Matilda's turn to choose the book. Evelina, one of Matilda's least favorite books, had proved a blessing, and after a warm cup of tea and a chapter or two of Frances Burney's novel, Lady Pratsby snored contentedly, as Matilda had hoped she would. And Matilda could stop reading, thank the heavens. Her tongue had gone numb from reading aloud. She stretched her jaw up and down, side to side, and curled and uncurled her tongue. She stopped short of wagging it, and slowly, oh so slowly, as to avoid even the merest shush of skin against paper, she closed the book and stood. She'd been reading how long now? She looked to the tall clock ticking away across the room, its patterned rhythm adding an odd percussive to the soft patter of the light rain that had washed London all morning long, hitting the windows. She squinted, read the clock. She'd read for over an hour. No wonder her legs were stiff, her back ached, and her more unmentionable areas of the body had gone numb. She pressed her hands into her lower back and arched, stretching, praying no crack of bone and spine would echo across the room and wake the Viscountess. Ah, better. Now she just needed tea like a pup needed a scratch behind the ears. Imperative. She poured the now lukewarm beverage into her cup and swallowed it down in 4 large gulps, then retook her seat and opened the book once more. The die is thrown, she read in her most moderate, sleep-inducing tones, and I attend the event in trembling. What event? The events of Evelina always quite slipped from her mind as soon as she'd read them. She could never remember, from one chapter to the next, what had happened. Quite perfect book for inspiring slumber. In a fortnight, she'd never have to read Evelina again, if she did not want to. For the first time in, well, perhaps ever, her time would be her own, to do with as she pleased, in her own home. She grinned. and heard a happier tone in her usual monotonous recitation. Lady Pratsby shifted a bit, made a face, and snorted more than snored. Just one. Perhaps it did not herald a waking. "Lady Pratsby!" Matilda stood, whirled around, and glared at the butler in the doorway, who'd called out. She held a finger to her lips. "Shh!" He shrank back, his eyes wide, flashing to the sleeping woman. "Apologies," he mouthed. Matilda turned to the Viscountess, her breath held tight in her chest, hoping. The Viscountess's eyes shot open. "He's mine, wench!" Blast. Mr. Johns took a step farther into the room, collecting his dignity about him with a shove of his sharp nose into the air. "Apologies for waking you, my lady, but our Marquess of Waneborough is here to speak with Miss Bellvue. Are you at home?" Lady Pratsby pulled herself more upright, patted her hair, and said, "No, we're not. I'm tired." Mr. Johns turned to leave. "Lady Pratsby," Matilda said, "the Marquess has come to see me. You are still weary, and I would like you to retreat to your room and nap if possible. While you are resting, I'll visit with the Marquess. I wonder if others' companions order them about as you do me." "If I order you about, it's because I care for you," Matilda said. "Well, you can't visit with the man alone, and— Oh!" She shook a finger at Mr. Johns. "Isn't Lord Waneborough the funny chap who has that outrageous house party every year, only for artists?" "Yes, that's him." Matilda folded her book and put it to the side. "And I rather think I should speak to him. I worked for him for a year, a long time ago, as governess to his daughter." "But why would he be here now, asking to speak to her?" She could not say. "Show him in, Johns." The Viscountess straightened her shoulders and smoothed her skirts. "I've always been curious about that house party." Mr. Johns left, and Matilda rang for more tea. "I think," she said, "you should leave me to speak with him alone, my lady." "Poppycock, you're an unmarried girl. I'm a companion, 34 years of age. He is a married man and father. He could be my father. I believe we can be allowed some privacy." She bustled to Lady Pratsby's side. "Do you need help rising?" "I'm 5 and 6, my dear, not dead." "But your knees, Lady Pratsby." Matilda held out a hand. "Bah!" But Lady Pratsby took the proffered help, and they stood together facing the door, smoothing their skirts. Lady Pratsby sliced her a sideways glance. "What's a Marquess doing here to speak with you?" As if Matilda hadn't been born a baron's daughter, hadn't taken her vows and had 2 seasons. After a certain amount of servitude, the life you were born into no longer mattered. Lady Pratsby's elbow dug into Matilda's ribs. "He likely wishes to marry you." Matilda laughed and moved away from the bony assault. "It is not that, I assure you. It must be 15 years since I've seen him." "Randy men don't forget pretty faces. Or figures," Lady Pratsby said. "He's horribly in love with his wife," Matilda assured her, "who is, as far as I know, yet living. If you'd seen them together, you'd understand. He has no intentions of straying from his marriage bed." "What then? Come now, don't hide anything from me. You're my companion, and it's your job to keep me informed and entertained, especially with gossip." "I've no clue, my lady. The truth, that she barely said a word to him, even when she'd resided in his house. The day of the picnic had been her most interaction with the man and with his son." Footsteps down the hall, the heavy fall of thick-soled boots alongside Mr. John's softer patter. Mr. John swept into the room. The Marquess of Waneborough. But the man standing awkward by his side, turning the brim of his sodden hat round in thick, long, increasingly wet-gloved fingers, was not the Marquess of Waneborough. The ends of his hair curled at his nape, stark and dark, damp and thick against the crisp white of his cravat. The rest of his hair, mahogany, a slight wave to it, was dry. The hat's doing likely. Mr. Johns must have taken his greatcoat, because the rest of him was dry as well, but for his boots, which boasted a layer of mud. His stubbled jaw and a straight, strong nose seemed carved from marble, in the nose, a little bump on it, up high, must have been broken once. His eyes were the pale blue of a hot summer sky, and he was not the Marquess she knew, but she did know him. The boy she'd known back then had been, it seemed, carved away entirely. Any soft points he'd had honed a rough hardness. She took several stumbling steps toward him. "Viscount Stillman, I'd not expected, but Mr. John said—" "My father died. I'm the Marquess of Waneborough now." She rocked back on her heels. "Oh, I do apologize. I had no idea. My condolences, my lord." He scratched a hand through his hair, dividing it into dark sections. Blast. I should have broken the news in a less startling way. I did not think. Perhaps, but she did not remember him as a particularly eloquent or smooth sort of man. If a woman ever took it upon herself to polish him up, she'd fail miserably. But some men needed no polish. They were fine the way they were, rough-hewn and of the elements. My lord, Mr. John stepped forward. May I take your hat now? Pardon? Lord Waneborough looked at the butler, startled. Oh, yes, of course. He jerked a wary glance toward Matilda and Lady Pratsby. Blast. Apologies. I remain in the country as much as possible, and I'm afraid there's not much need to hold my tongue there. Don't mind me, lad, Lady Pratsby said. I'm no stranger to an impolite word or two. I bet I could shock you. Lord Waneborough looked to Matilda, mouth slightly open. Did he seek help? He'd find none from her. It suited Matilda most hours of the day to let her employer do and say as she pleased. It kept the woman happy, gave her pleasure, and Matilda would never deny that, especially not to the woman she'd met in the middle of her earth-swallowing grief. Lady Pratsby had healed quite nicely from losing her husband in the 3 years they'd been together. Oh, she would shock you, Matilda said, terribly. Yes, delightful. The Marquess scratched the back of his neck. Miss Bellvue, may I speak with you? To the point, then, yes, she remembered that about him, an admirable quality she'd long admired in him. Yes, of course, she said with a nod, just as Lady Pratsby said, no, of course not. Matilda turned stiff to her employer. My lady, you need not remain here. His lordship and I are old acquaintances. Lady Pratsby only narrowed her eyes at the Marquess. You can say what you have to say before me. Very well, then, he held his chin high. I'm in need of a companion for my mother. She has suffered much since the loss of my father, and she needs distraction, a friend. Lady Pratsby huffed. A paid friend? Is that not what you have, my lady? Lord Waneborough tone could snap through wood. The Viscountess chuckled. But I won't for long if you have your way, isn't that right? You're trying to steal her from me. Matilda frowned. The two thought they could march right over her. Matilda preferred to do the marching herself. Once she understood the rhythm, she stepped between them. Do you intend to ask me to be a companion to your mother, my lord? I do, a stiff nod. His toe had started tapping on the floor. She pulled in a deep breath. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I am honored you have thought of me, but who else would I think of, Miss Bellvue? You were the only person who kept Maggie, that's his sister, from going feral all those years ago. You're the only reason she has a thimbleful of understanding of the social world she moves through, and you did it all without snuffing her out. He waved a hand toward Lady Pratsby. And look at the Viscountess. She clearly does not wish to lose you, and I have seen you through each and every new position you've taken, and each family, each house has looked on you with pride. I ask again, Miss Bellvue, who would I choose if not you? Huh? Lady Pratsby sank down into her pink chair to the creak of angry knees. Keep talking. I like it when a young man knows truth. Matilda gathered her skirts and swept toward the study door at the other end of the room. We will have that private audience now, my lord. Please follow me. She did not look to the Viscountess for confirmation. She was no green girl. Lady Pratsby wagged her finger at them. Don't take too long, or I'll come in after you. And Miss Bellvue? Matilda stopped at the door, Lord Waneborough almost bumping into her. Yes, my lady. Do let him down gently. I'm closing the door, Matilda said. Lady Pratsby waved a hand at them, and Matilda slipped into the small, dark study. She swept across the room and threw open the curtains, letting the gray light of the rainy day turn dark shadows into slightly brighter ones. When she turned to him, he stood in the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back, a lock of damp curling hair falling over one eye, a handsome man in an unrefined way. He should intimidate her, but she'd known him when he was still quite young, when he was seeing, for the first time, the breaks and fractures in the world, same as she was. They'd learned bitter truths side by side, and she saw in him not a gruff Marquess demanding her help, but a man trying his best to keep his world afloat, same as she. My lord, she said, I'm so very sorry to hear of your loss. Is it recent? January. Thank you for your condolences, but what I truly need is your help. She nodded. That is what I understand, but I'm afraid I cannot help you. I cannot pay you well, which you know, of course. I assume that colors your refusal. Not at all, and I am valiantly succeeding in not being insulted by your implication. You have done much for me through the years, always a supporter from afar, and I do appreciate that. I'm quite grateful. Her breath hitched, and she spoke in lower tones. You've kept all your promises to me. What then puts a refusal on your tongue? He asked. I'm afraid, no, I'm pleased to tell you. I'm a free woman. In a fortnight, that is. Then you will be free of me, of the burden of promises made long ago. His brows lowered, drew together like two storm clouds about to strike lightning. The London rain had coalesced on his forehead. I've inherited a house, she explained. A home. In Cumbria, a small cottage, a small, very small annuity from an aunt. When Lady Pratsby's daughter returns to London in a fortnight, I will leave her employ and head to Cumbria to live a life of solitude and ease. I see. You should have told me, he said. I had planned to write you once I settled, my lord. I have served others for 15 years, and now I shall serve myself. I hope you are pleased for me. Blast it, Matilda. Of course I am. You do not sound pleased. His palms found his face, scrubbed up and down. My mother, he heaved a sigh as his arms dropped heavy to his sides. It is not your worry. Please do give her my good wishes. She was always kind to me, and I hope she heals from her loss. Of course, and I do understand, he said, if I suddenly inherited, well, if 15 years of struggle came to an end. Another sigh, this one rough as a brick. I understand, Miss Bellvue, and I wish you well, even if, selfishly, I wish your aunt had left someone else her cottage in Cumbria. She laughed just enough to slide a bit of easiness between them. He bowed, a stiff board bent in two. Good day, Miss Bellvue. Good day, my lord. She pointed to a second door across the room. If you escape out that door, you will not have to face the Viscountess again. He grinned, the first one she'd seen from him since he'd arrived muddy-booted minutes before, and heavens, but her heart raced again. Not from fear this time, though she was startled by how handsome his chiseled, grinning face was, how tempting and soft his full lips looked curved round a moment of humor. Her heart skipped because in that grin was the young, unsure man who'd also pulled the air from her lungs with such ease. Thank you, he said, but at least you saved me in this way, and Miss Bellvue, you were never a burden. She returned his smile and tried not to watch his legs and other lower anatomy move in his buckskins as he crossed the room and passed through the door. Tried and failed. No reason not to enjoy a peek, though, when she'd never see him again. He'd always had a lovely lower half. Now that man knows how to fill out a pair of pants. She'd been caught. She turned to find her employee leaning against the frame of the other door. Filling out breeches is not something someone can know how to do, Matilda said. It is just something they do. Precisely, girl, and that fellow does, Lady Pratsby said. If anything, we should be praising his tailor, Matilda insisted, and, oh, she closed her eyes and found the right path of conversation. Shall we finish another chapter of Evelina, my lady? Matilda joined her in the doorway. No, Lady Pratsby said, but we can talk about that man's offer. Matilda sailed into the other room. You told me to refuse him gently. I did. Ah, I see. Mrs. Hoskins has brought more tea. Lovely. I only have you, my dear companion, for another fortnight. I'll not send you away sooner than that. Just so, Matilda said. It had been interesting to see him again, to see the man he'd become. No more gangly youth, but something else was missing from him too, a vulnerability. He used to wear his smiles easily, and that no-nonsense way of speaking he'd had, that used to be his delivery of compliments and easy conversation. Now she feared he did not speak unless accomplishing something, did not move unless he had a purpose. A pity that. She'd lived the last 15 years of life with purpose and had thus learned the value of leisure. That life of labor would soon be done, the home she'd always longed for so very near. There were plenty of women in England in need of position as companion. Let the Marquess find someone else to work for him.